could even result in a feeling of helplessness. But I want to encourage you because we are on the precipice of a moment of real accountability. We actually, in spite of what we have to endure, have the gift, have the good fortune in just 9 days to make a statement and be accountable to who we are, beyond party politics, beyond being a Democrat, beyond being a Republican, beyond being an independent, whatever, but just being human, being committed to the promise of this country, which is what makes this country special, the promise of America, that no matter your race, your class, your gender, your religion, your sexual orientation, we're all the same, we're all afforded the same opportunities or the equal chance at pursuing whatever path towards happiness we desire. That is the promise of this country, and it is a promise that is being broken. And it's been being broken for a while. And before I get into why I think we've ended up where we are, and I think I do have a real sense of how we got here and how we can fix it. I want to just say, because this is the 10th town hall that we've done. And we've done one in all the counties. We have one more after this one, in Dutchess County. So we'll do one in all 11 counties. And the reason why I thought, you can clap, I like that. And the reason why we decided to do this is because, it's important to bring back true representation and to get back to understanding what it ought to sound like and feel like and what it means to be engaged and what it means to work with the community, and to not set yourself apart from it as if you're somehow expected to be in your position of power. I think we have too many folks in Congress who take for granted the seat they hold and believe that it's owed them, that they're there because they're special, as opposed to thinking about they're there to serve the folks who put them there. Not outside interests, not special interests. And when somebody can, spend a year and a half avoiding his constituents, not showing up, I fundamentally have a problem with that, because to me that's disrespectful, and it speaks to how low the bar is right now. That somebody can feel that comfortable saying, I don't need to show up, I don't have to engage or account to you. I just will lean on whatever outside support that I can get from the heavy hitters, and I'll be just fine. And that is the sort of climate that we are living in right now. And as I've said at every beginning of the town halls that I've been to now, I don't assume this is a universally democratic group of people. And I hope it's not. I hope we have Republicans in the room, and moderates and independents and non-affiliates, because to me it's important that we set an example of what it means to be able to come together with different points of views, politically speaking, have disagreements, but do so agreeably, do so with civility, do so respectfully, and push each other to be better. So to me, this is a part of the process for us as a community to really improve and be better, and to teach our young people what it's like to engage, and to re-engage ourselves in this process that we call democracy, which is complicated, particularly in a district as diverse as this and as a country as diverse as America. We've got to figure out how to come together and really do the work of promoting the general welfare and not enabling just private greed. So I, as I'm sure many of you know at this point, maybe you don't, a lot of why I'm running is because of how much of the promise of this country was afforded to me, and how I know that my story and where I come from and the jobs that my parents had, the schooling that I was afforded, had those things not been there, then my life wouldn't have happened, and I wouldn't have been able to live a story of upward mobility that so many folks don't feel like is possible right now, no matter how hard people are working. I grew up working class. My parents worked for GE. We were able to work our way up, buy our first brand new home when I was in high school, after living in 4 or 5, 6 different apartments, after cutting coupons and putting clothes on layaway and living that life of saving and dreaming about what's possible around the corner. And my parents telling me about education and how important education is. I mean, they beat it into my head. It's gotta be the way. It is the way. You know, coming home every day, doing my homework, leaving it on the counter as a latchkey kid. And those were the rules. And I think we've gotten away from, as a country, prioritizing education. We don't even talk about it anymore. You know, we had 3 debates between Hillary and Trump. Not one question about education. Not one. Nor any question about the environment. Those are 2 future-oriented issues. And we didn't even talk about them on the national stage in 3 debates. So what does that say about how the national discourse is being set? Who's setting it? If we're not talking about the future. I wager to say that it's the folks who don't want to talk about this, the folks who want to keep the status quo as is, and don't have a desire or a wish or a hope to create a better future. Now I, was able to grow up. When I was growing up, we were #1 in the world in upward mobility. America was. Now we're dead last in the Western world. Dead last in upward mobility. And I was able to be a part of that last generation of folks who stood on those jobs that their parents had in the schooling and how we prioritized it in this country. And went off to Colgate and then Oxford and got my law degree and had 2 careers after that. And I know you heard of one of my careers. I know you have. And I had 5 years of working with young kids with music, and then came back and became a litigator in a very different space, in the commercial space. So I think my diverse set of experiences are what allowed me, to really figure out how to find common ground with divergent points of views. I've lived it. My life is diversity. I've come across all different walks of life. Race, gender, class, sexual orientation, religion. I've lived it. And along the way, have had to figure out how to navigate those worlds and find common ground and be an advocate, whether it's for young people or whether it's in the commercial space. I've always had to be that advocate. And what's made me want to step up now to serve the community that raised me and my wife, who grew up in Woodstock, just an hour away from me, born in Akron. Born in Akron. We have benefited from a different time. But those 40 some odd years that we've lived, I'm 41, we're both 41 years old, the wages have remained stagnant over those 40 years of our lives for folks. And the economy's doubled in size during that same period of time. And workers are working harder. They're working harder. Productivity is increasing, and yet wages are remaining flat. The cost of healthcare is going up, the cost of housing is going up, the cost of clothing, the cost of transportation, everything has gone up, except wages. Meanwhile, the assault on labor and collective bargaining, the right to work laws, has only increased. And so there's a correlation between that assault on labor and stagnant wages that we don't talk enough about on the national level. All we hear about is privatization and the way the unions get in the way of that, in essence. And it's been undermining wage growth every step of the way. And now we're living in a time where 80% of folks right now are sharing just 10% of the wealth. 80% are sharing just 10% of the wealth. 2/3 are living paycheck to paycheck in this country. 2/3. And if you look at where all the economic gains have gone since the 2009 recovery from the recession, so 2009 on, 95% of all the economic gains have gone to the top 1%. So after all that devastation, people losing their homes, 401ks, assets, trillions of dollars worth, after all of that devastation, and no one was held accountable, by the way, all the gains since then have gone to basically every single gain, 95%, top 1%. So as I've thought about these numbers, 1 in 3 kids in Sullivan County growing up poor, in our own district, 1 in 3 kids. When you think about these numbers, 80% of folks in our district facing hunger. And the fastest growing class of folks are working poor people. Working poor people. I say, well, maybe this is why we have so much divisiveness. Because as I've studied the way these trends have happened and how much the divisiveness has increased, I think they go hand in hand. My theory is, I think that it's a distraction. I think the more and more extreme and partisan and divisive our politics becomes, it's a gamut. It's meant to keep us away from understanding that we are natural allies. That more and more and more of us are catching it. And more and more and more of us are struggling. More and more of us need, want, and are owed responsible, thoughtful government that promotes private greed. We all know this. It's almost intuitive. We get it, particularly as Americans, we get it. But there's been all this noise and distraction and attacks, personal and otherwise, to pull us away from each other. And there have been individuals who've now mastered that language, become fluent in that language, and have a really good skill, not a good one, but a skill that allows them to exploit for their own personal gain and benefit. Until we put people in Congress and other political positions of power who make it a point to offer a different approach, to bring us together, to be deliberative and focused on solutions, to not take corporate PAC money and outside moneyed interests, so they're only beholden to the people, who will only show up and be beholden to the people, and who will fight for policies that promote everybody's well-being. Until we make that decision, we're gonna find ourselves in this place. Because what do we get if we don't? We get folks who say it's okay to take healthcare away from folks for a tax break for a wealthy few, right? Or we could get somebody who says it's okay to advance a tax bill that adds $1.5 trillion to our deficit, bankrupts our ability to invest in infrastructure and education and renewable energy, and puts at risk programs like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. And they're already beginning to cut it. $1.5 trillion they just cut from Medicaid. They want to cut. $500 billion they want to cut from Medicare, turn it into a voucher program. They're cutting with SNAP and income security programs. People are hungry and in need. They're gnawing at the bone to pay for a big cash giveaway that was not needed. And the only reason why they feel comfortable voting like this and literally just disrespecting the vast majority of their constituents is because they don't think folks are gonna vote anyway. And as long as they got money and power and folks backing them up, they'll be okay. And the system has been working this way for a very long time. And when you add in Citizens United, which allows the powerful few to dump unlimited amounts of money into the system, the motivation becomes that much more intense to say, let me just side with the guys who I know can keep me in with money. And just hope long enough that people don't catch on and distract them with all the divisiveness and the partisanship. Do that long enough and we'll just keep skating on by. And here we are, where people are at each other's throats. Nothing is getting done. Our democracy is literally coming undone because of the moral bankruptcy that individuals right now we call leaders are operating with in DC. There's a moral bankruptcy. Forget the politics. It's just right and wrong. And it's cruel when you vote the way that they've been voting. It's ugly when you're making these kind of cuts. We should be talking about universal health care and stop being the only developed country in the world without it. That should be on the agenda. We should be making sure that we're investing in robust public works infrastructure, roads, rail, broadband access, cell service. That is how you create economic growth from the ground up, instead of giving big giveaways to folks with the hope that it somehow will just trickle down to everybody else when it never does. The last time we gave these kind of breaks, it didn't trickle down. It was a tsunami that landed on our heads, and it was called the Great Recession. That's what happened. It wasn't a trickle down. We need real, meaningful tax breaks for workers, middle class, working class folks, not tied to giveaways. And we can do that. Why is it every time we have a benefit that we want to give to everyday Americans, it has to always come with some giveaway? And you can see it everywhere. It's just not fair. The community banks, we need to roll back regulations for Dodd-Frank. Okay, great, but why, to do that, do we have to make sure that the big banks also get the regulations rolled back? You know why? Because the big banks told the guys in Congress, you can't do that unless you get us a slice of the pie too. That's how it works. And our congressman votes for a bill and then hides behind the fact, oh, well, the community banks, they get something too. Great, we all want them to get something. But why do they have to get it too? At our expense, at our future's expense. It shouldn't be like that. And the only reason why it is because bought and paid for. And that's why you won't hear folks say Medicare needs to have negotiating power with Big Pharma, or at least Congressman Fazzo will say that, because Big Pharma is in his pocket. And they don't want him to say Medicare should have negotiating power with Big Pharma. It's that simple. It's the same reason he votes for a farm bill, where over 80% of the subsidies go to mega and corporate farmers, none of whom live in this district. Not one. Not a single one. And that same farm bill guts the funding for the very programs that would help small and mid-tier farmers right here at home. So how do you explain that vote? You sit on the ag committee, you're supposed to be helping your farmers here locally, you vote for a farm bill that does the exact opposite. The only way that I can understand that is if you're bought and paid for by corporate interests outside this district, and you hope that's going to keep you in power. Or you vote for a Financial Choice Act, which, by the way, to my retirees in the room, literally rolls back the Obama-era regulation that says, if you are advising retirees, please put the interest of your clients before your own. Common sense, right? You would think. Well, they just voted to roll back that regulation and to gut the supervisory authority of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which was put in place to oversee the banking community. Again, FAFSA voted for that too. So this is a clear contrast, okay? This is an important point to understand. What John Fazzo represents is a career of operating within the system. He's a creature of the system who's become very fluent in the language of partisanship and divisiveness to protect his own interests at our expense. That's it. And that's what he's been able to do. And he's even done it as a lobbyist, lobbying against the interests of his community, like the pipelines, Constitution pipeline. He's got a record of this. He was dinged for pay-to-play violations, for Ponzi scheme. These are all facts. That's the interesting thing. I just give you facts. I don't make stuff up. These are just facts. I am here to fight for you, to be only beholden to you at every turn. I don't want any favors to anybody, and I don't intend to. On both sides of the aisle, for that matter. I'm walking in there to be an independent actor, to fight for you, and to make sure that we're fighting for affordable housing, to make sure we're fighting for good paying jobs, to make sure that we're investing in our public schools, to make sure we're dealing with the opioid epidemic and Lyme disease and climate change, and actually get our priorities in order. Gender inequity. We got a lot of work to do, and we can't afford to not do it, to actually do the work. And there is a role for government to play in this, and a critical role. We just need folks in there who are dedicated to do that work. And so before I open it up to questions, which I'm happy to do, I just ask each and every one of you to recognize that these next 9 days really afford us an opportunity. I feel very humbled to be in this position. I know coming out of a very competitive primary, it could have been anybody. So I feel very humbled and blessed to be able to have the opportunity to serve you and to do that work day in and day out. And you have in me somebody who's a fighter. You know, I will go to blows at every turn because I care a lot. And, you know, I love this community. And we need a lot more love in our politics. We need a lot more folks who are willing to love their community and not just see it as an end or means to an end, but as an end in and of itself. And this community raised me, raised my wife, and is raising our children. And so we're fully invested in the future of this place. And I just want to thank each and every one of you for coming out, for being engaged, being determined to own this democracy again. And I'm excited to take your questions. Thank you.
foot canvassing yesterday for the Line A candidates in Ellenville, and I came across a problem I couldn't solve. I was speaking to a woman, and I said, "Are you going to vote?" And she said, "Well, no, I'm not going to vote." I said, well, are you happy with what's going on right now? And she said, "No." I said, "Well, why aren't you going to vote?" She said, "I voted once, and then Trump won, and I'm not going to vote again." And then I spent 3 or 4 minutes trying to give her everything I could. I couldn't convince her that her vote was important. What would you say to me?
Well, I mean, I would say a few things. One, there's a reason communities who've been marginalized, be they people of color, be they women, who have fought and died and sacrificed their lives for the right to vote. There's a reason. And the reason is that's the only way you're really going to be heard at the end of the day. You should never take for granted this right. It's the essence of any well-functioning democracy. And it is important that we drill down, from my vantage point, and I've talked to a lot of young people about this too. I was just out in SUNY New Paltz, and I had a meet and greet with 200 students. And I emphasized, don't just assume that it's a given that you just have this right. That you just wake up and it's there, just because you happen to be in America. No, you had to fight for this.
That's right.
Like, you had to fight, and there's a reason people had to fight. Because once you have it, it is a powerful instrument.
Yes, it is.
It is the way. It is the way to make change. The only way, only peaceful way to make change. And so it's important for folks to not lose sight of history and to lose sight of where they come from. And again, as an African American, I always, go back to my own history in terms of what we had to go through, and a lot of communities have had to go through in their own different ways at their own timeline to get to a point to earn that right, to receive that right. And so I would always just talk to folks about that and let them know how high the stakes are and how they have a voice, and they should never silence themselves when so much is on the line.
Thank you. I'll give you a
seductive, and the campaign you're involved in is one of the highest funding campaigns in the country right now. When you get to Washington, and I hope you do, there are going to be people banging on your door asking for something back for that 50,000, 100,000, $500,000. On a gut level, how are you going to respond to them?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because one of the things that my wife and I had to decide when we were running, when I say we, because it was a we decision, was, are we comfortable asking for money? A lot. You got to ask for money a lot of times. It's just the reality of this system. It's a reality of this system that is not, like, I didn't say, "Oh, I want to run to raise money." Like, that wasn't the thought, right? It wasn't like, "Oh, I really want to run because I want to go raise money." It was the furthest thing from my mind. But it was also a reality to be competitive in this space. The piece you're talking about, 50,000 or 100,000, that comes into play when you take corporate PAC money. When you allow corporate entities to bankroll your campaign. I don't take corporate PAC money. I've made a pledge, and I can tell you, I've been to DC now a few times, and there are lobbyists, right, who are just everywhere, and you can't help but bump into them no matter where you go in DC, who, develop relationships with, and they'll tell you, why would you not take corporate PAC money? I can't. Well, we can still be friends. That's okay. It's like a shock to the system for them. But that's a good thing. It needs to be a shock. And you need to create that independence and that separation and say, no, I'm not here to do your bidding. I'm here to serve my community. And I think being able to raise the money we've raised, and you're right, we've raised a lot of money, but keep in mind, over 95% of all the money we've raised has come from people, individuals. And the folks who aren't people are labor union PACs. Labor. Folks who are on the side of the working people. So from my vantage point, I'm funded, and yes, we've been successful because the climate we're in. I feel very fortunate to be running in this moment because we have a lot of folks who are giving for the first time in their lives. Just like the first time they've gone to a meet and greet, the first time they've canvassed, the first time they phone banked, the first time they voted. There's a lot of firsts that are happening for a lot of people in this climate. And so with a lot of hard work, which is where I come from, is hard work, I've been able to tap into that new energy and that new enthusiasm and raise a lot of money based on people's appetite to give in this current climate. And I think, to your point, once I'm in DC, there will be all types of different elements involved there. But I will be advocating for policies that empower people and give me the independence that I want. I'll be advocating for types of publicly financed reform. I'll be advocating for the Government for the People Act, which empowers folks with limited means to run for office. I'll be advocating for overturning Citizens United. I'll be advocating for making sure that the lobbying shop, revolving door, actually gets cooled all the way down, right? Those are things that I would be lobbying, right, for, or fighting for, to make sure that we can empower people. And then on top of that, I'll be fighting for legislation that it makes it easier for folks to vote. Because until, I tell you right now, as long as Citizens United is in play, which is gonna be hard to deal with and overturn, the other way to deal with it is to make it easier for folks to vote. So whether it's making sure that election day is a holiday, which I'm a big proponent of, it shouldn't be a work day. You gotta figure out where you're gonna, put your kids and maybe take off time from work. No, it should be a holiday. You should have same-day registration. You should have, when you turn 18 and you get a license, you should be automatically enrolled. I'm of that mindset. You have to opt out, right? Not be forced to opt in or left to opt in. We have to encourage voter participation, because that's how you actually balance the equation with all the money, is make it easier for folks who don't have that money to show up and vote. Because you can't erase a vote with money. A vote is a vote. And so as long as we get folks out there voting, we'll be in a better spot.
So you'll still answer my phone calls?
Absolutely. And I've taken the pledge, to do town halls, at least 4. And that's a bare minimum. At least 4 town halls every year. So I intend to come to be here. And if you look at how we're running our campaign right now, we have offices all across this district. Otsego, Schoharie, Columbia County, Dutchess, Ulster, we're everywhere. 6 offices, 7 offices. And we want to keep having. One of the things that I really appreciate about the last congressman, who was a Republican, Chris Gibson, was that he actually held town halls. Yep. And he actually put his calendar on his website, and he actually engaged the community in a way that the current congressman does not, right? And I think, again, beyond partisanship here, there's a certain level that you should expect from your congressperson when it comes to doing the job. And you have to do a lot of work for the job where, by definition, your job is to show up, to earn the nickname No Show. You have to really work hard to earn that nickname. It's funny, but it's not. Like, if the job is to show up, and you're walking around, people calling you No Show John Fazzo, that means you're really absent. That memes you're going out of your way to be absent. It's not unintentional. It's intentional.
Fundraisers, though.
Yes, he does. He does have fundraisers. Yes.
Do you think that if we gain a majority in the Senate and the House, that the Democrats will really fight as a coalition to take Citizens United back to the Supreme Court? And how does that work, and is that possible?
Yeah, well, here's the challenge. This is why I said it's going to be hard, because it's not just the Democrats. For us to actually, to achieve what we have to achieve, which is a constitutional amendment to overturn it, right? You'd have to actually not just have the House, but 2/3 of the Senate, right? So it's a significant hurdle. And the best we can do, in my estimation, would be some real campaign finance reform within the purview of that, which is not easy. And making sure that we actually make it easy for folks to vote. And the piece I left out is gerrymandering. Because that makes it harder too. When you have districts where it doesn't matter if you could be in a red district and it's so red that if you're a Democrat, your vote doesn't count. It just doesn't count. It doesn't matter. And the only thing that the eventual Republican nominee or Democrat, depending on what district you're in, has to worry about is being primaried. I don't want to make sure nobody's more left of me or more right of me. And that disincentivizes cooperation, because you don't want to be hit with saying, oh, you're too moderate, or you're too you're too bipartisan, God forbid, that you actually want to reach across the aisle and figure out solutions to complicated problems. And so I'm big much in favor of independent commissions. Take it out of the state legislature's hands, which are currently the ones who draw the districts. So if you're in power, if the state legislature is in control, and say you have the Republicans in power, and they can decide how to draw the district, well, it's human nature to draw the district in a way that might just be a little bit more favorable to your party, right? And over time, you keep making it a little bit more favorable and more favorable. So you get these districts that look crazy.
So Prop 1 gives us an opportunity to support that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important, yes, absolutely. And I think the Supreme Court is actually taking up a case, Wisconsin, I think, case that deals with this issue. And we'll see how they land. I mean, given the dynamics now of the court, you know, we'll see. But it's an important matter.
And the list goes on and on and on. But the bottom line is, you represent us in Washington. We are the ones who are going to put you there. We're the ones who will keep you there, or we're the ones who take you out of there. Do you have any plans for your people, and I said for us, specific programs that you'd like to see that for your representatives alone? We're not talking about countrywide.
Yeah, absolutely.
What would some of those issues be?
So there's a couple of things. And there's legislation that is being worked through right now in both chambers that I think I would want to jump on top of. You know, there's a bill called the American Housing Upward Mobility Act, or Economic Mobility Act. And it's about $500 billion or so that's going to go towards, you know, investing in affordable housing. And particularly, a subset of that money will go towards rural housing.
How much of that money are you going to get for us?
Well, that's the thing. We can't earmark now, man. And there's no earmarking
We're just
here.
going to fight for it.
Okay, but yes, I could fight like hell for that bill, right? And I could fight like hell and say, listen, we need to expand this rural pocket a bit more. We need to fight. How do we figure out how to make sure that however this bill is crafted, the contingencies are more reflective of the community that I know is in need, in my community, right? And so thinking about, one, those types of legislative measures that will really help us. Infrastructure is in the same vein. Yes, it's a national issue, but not every country, not every district has the same sort of cell service issues that we have, or broadband access issues that we have. You know, those are issues that, you know, when we talk about investment in infrastructure, from not just that, but roads and rail and broadband, all these things we need real investment in. So that's another big piece. Opioids, you know, we're getting hit really hard in our community. And I know the congressman, I give just due where it's due. He worked on the STOP Act, which deals with the distribution of fentanyl. Great. Not the approach I would have taken. I mean, anything we could do to help, great. But to me, it's more important to actually make sure we have funding for drug treatment centers so that we can decriminalize the behavior and make sure that our young people have a chance at recovery. We need to be focusing more and more on that. And you can't say you're for dealing with the problem on the one hand, but then vote to cut back Medicaid expansion, which is the exact funding that allows us to do it. Right? So the opioid epidemic, Lyme disease, another big issue across this district, which is tied to climate change. The National Science Foundation just declared that Lyme disease is an emerging global pandemic because of climate change. Because of. And we can link climate change not just to Lyme disease, but to also the impact it's having on our farming community, which again is about here at home. This district is massive. Connecticut and Rhode Island combined, 2 states, almost 8,000 square miles. I'd argue it's the best collection of small cities and big towns in the country. You drive in and out of this, you're just weaving in and out of towns. Just weaving, end to end. And it's beautiful, it's majestic. But as you weave, you see a bunch of these small, mid-tier family farms of all sorts, right? And we need to have a real advocate to restore prosperity for these farms, whether it's dairy farmers or fruit and vegetable farmers. And that takes somebody who could sit on the ag committee and fight for the kind of funding that'll actually prop up these kind of farmers, whether it's diversifying the crop insurance program, whether it's the farmers market program or food promotion programs. We have to invest and get away from the monopolization of ag. And again, so that to me would be a benefit. And lastly, the environment. To me, dealing with the climate change crisis is paramount on moral grounds, right? We have an Earth that is under siege right now. Rising sea, we saw the report with the UN. Scary, it's frightening. 2040, we're seeing disappearing coral reefs, right? 5 years on record, 5 in a row, hottest event a year. And then 3 decades in a row, hottest, rising, everything. And if you ask farmers the impact it's having on their crop seasons and the impact on the soil, if we could start investing, meaningfully investing in renewable energy away from the fossil fuel industry, we spend billions of dollars propping up big oil. Still, we're talking $20 billion a year in tax credits and subsidies to prop up an industry that is a dinosaur industry. It is outdated and it's harmful to our environment. It emits carbon. It's just science. Carbon is warming the earth. It has for a very long time. And natural gas is not the answer because that releases methane. So the answer is clean energy, clean renewable energy. And we can incentivize investment in these areas. Wind, solar, geothermal, we can really incentivize investment if we have leadership to do it. And it would help here, given how majestic and how beautiful our environment is, from the mountains to the rivers to the lakes, streams. We have the opportunity to really, from a tourism perspective and from just an economic generator perspective. You go out to Delaware River, it's one of the best trout fisheries in the Northeast. It's net value about $400 million annually. There's economic value in our environment. So we have to protect it, to generate. So these are the things that I will be focusing on that I think impact here at home. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about healthcare. I mean, I know it's a national issue, but goodness, here in our district, we're talking Sullivan County is bottom 2 in the state in healthcare outcomes. Greene County, 47. Columbia County, not far behind. So 3 counties in this district that are hurting. Rural access issues, hurting. Prescription drugs, everything. People want answers. They want fight for universal healthcare. They want people to make sure they don't have to make decisions, life and death decisions based on their pocketbook. So fighting for expanding healthcare is critically important to me too. It'll make a profound difference here at home. Yes.
Okay, so you talked about the environment and you talked about healthcare. So the environment is science.
Yes.
And I think people on our side think that healthcare is a moral issue, right? So how do you bipartisanship with people who don't believe in science and don't believe in the moral issue?
Well, that's funny because usually you can make a case that in our world today, there's a false, that people assume that science and morality are mutually exclusive.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
I know. That's not what you're saying. I'm just saying the irony in that question is that you would think sometimes that those two things can't go hand in hand. And listen, I think there's a couple answers to this that I want to give. One, we just can't tolerate people who don't, at least in the realm of public service, in the realm of politics, in the realm where we have to actually solve problems and we need objective points of reference to do so. You can't have agreement. You can't cooperate if you don't have some sort of objective common ground to refer to. You have to have some baseline set of facts. And then you can have opinions based on those facts. But if you start just making up facts based on how you feel, well, we can't have a rational conversation. It's impossible. And so I have very little tolerance, for people who are intellectually honest and who don't accept that climate change is real. If you're in Congress and you can sit up there and say it's a hoax, well, you shouldn't be in Congress.
They are.
No, we can change that. We can change that. Like, we have that power. We can draw the line in the sand. That could just be you could have just a bright line rule. Anybody in Congress who is willing to stand up and say climate change is not real, well, you should go home. Go home. You can believe that on your own time. We don't have time to deal with that. We don't have time. And then on the moral question, this is a deeper question, I think, particularly on healthcare. And we can have a debate about the best way to make healthcare universal, or the best way to, take the profit motive out of our health. We can have a rational debate, and I'm not a demagogue on this. I can understand how some folks, I have not been advocating for a single payer system, for example. I've been advocating for a public option and giving people the choice to opt into Medicare. It's a distinction, right? So I try to be thoughtful about this and say, okay, how do we bring folks together around an issue, around one core principle, that we're no longer the only developed country in the world without some form of healthcare. If all the other developed countries in the world can see fit to do this, that's enough facts for me to say, well, we shouldn't be the only ones out of that. Like, we should be a part of that developed world. And that's one way to do it. And so for me, it's as simple as this. If you're willing to take from people who need, who are very vulnerable, and the only justification you can provide for doing so, as was the case when they voted for the American Health Care Act, was to give a tax break to a wealthy few. If that's your only justification, you can't think of any other reason. We want to try to maybe do reinsurance and bulk up the subsidies or open the markets across state lines. Okay, we can have a discussion about that. But if you're literally just doing it because you want to just give a tax break, that is by definition in my world immoral. It's cruel. Because the only thing you're doing is saying, I'm taking to give to somebody else. I'm taking from those who need. In the church that I was raised in, that's just immoral. And there's no justification for it. Zero. And so in the same vein, if you have a congressman, and guess what? Here's where you really have the power. Because we have a congressman right now who was the deciding vote to do that, just that. So you can do something right now about that. You know what it is? You have that power. Yes.
When you get there, what committees are you interested in serving on?
Yes, I have 3 that I always keep top of mind, and I think they reflect the needs of this district. Workforce development and education. We have not talked a lot about education, but from my vantage point, like I said, it was the great equalizer in my household. That's how it was phrased to me, the gateway to opportunity. And I feel like we've left our children behind, particularly kids in districts like this where, the opportunities aren't bountiful at this point. We have to keep investing and create more economic growth. And we are not investing in trade schools or vocational schools or apprenticeship programs where we've stopped that sort of other form of education and skills training programs that will allow our young people to graduate from high school and maybe not go to college, because that's not for everybody. If they want to, they should, but still have other avenues to pursue and make a good living. And again, this goes back to labor. I was just at the IBEW apprenticeship school for electricians. Great program. You can graduate from high school, go spend a couple years in this apprenticeship program that's put forward by the IBEW, electrical workers, end up making $180,000 with benefits, right? I mean, that's a good deal, right? But we're not investing in these programs enough. We're not propping up these programs enough. In the same vein, Ulster County Community College has a program, the Pathways Program. It's a 6-year program. Science, technology, engineering, and math. They take young kids from Kingston School District, or surrounding district for that matter, bring them to the campus and get them in an intense program, and they work with the surrounding business owners to figure out how to make sure the curriculum reflects the needs of the business owners, so that when folks graduate, young kids graduate, they're on a straight path line to a job that is needed in the community. And you can model that kind of program out with all the SUNY schools we have across this district. And if we are going to send our kids to college, come on, can we stop profiting off of them? Can we stop this? When I was in college, which is not that long ago, I'm 41, but when I was in college, they didn't charge you interest during your 4 years. While you were in school, you weren't charged interest. Well, you are now, if you're a student. And the interest rate matched the treasury rate, more or less. You know what it is now? It's 6-7%. Why? How'd that happen? Because privatization, profiteering, run amok. And that's how we get here. And on top of that, they're gutting Pell Grants. Gutting it. $200 billion cut from educational programs, including Pell Grants. So Education, I know this is a long answer to the question, but workforce development, education, I won't be as long for the second two. Transportation and infrastructure, again, infrastructure and agriculture. Those three areas to me, those three committees, if we have a real advocate on those committees, we can meet the needs of New York 19 in a meaningful way.
Thank you so much for your forceful opposition to SNAP cuts in the Farm Bill. It hasn't been widely reported, but those cuts would also reduce school meals participation because of direct certification between SNAP and school meals. And as you probably know, most school meals are mandated to have milk.
Yes.
And so those cuts would also desperately hurt the dairy farms. Yet Congressman Fasto has gotten hundreds of thousands of dollars from outside agriculture interests. Do you think this is another example of him putting special interests outside the district above the needs of the people in the district?
It absolutely is. The short answer is yes. But here's something that's interesting about the SNAP debate. He's really decided to, there's some issues where Congressman chooses to not really push back. He kind of acknowledges where he might be wrong. I wouldn't say acknowledges, but he knows it's not the kind of place he wants to go. And this one, interestingly enough, he leans into it a bit. It's interesting. He really leans into this. He's very proud of this vote to make it harder for folks. In essence, the age was raised from 18 to 49 to 18 to 59, right? And instead of having to work 20 hours, now it's 25 hours. And the rationale behind it is, well, there's a lot of fraud. There's people who are gaming the system, even though it's one of the highest quality control measure programs in the country. We're talking about 1%, less than 1% of folks who are quote unquote frauding the system. So when he starts talking about people aren't getting off their butts and working, you know, I'm not following it. Particularly when a lot of folks in our district, thousands of folks have folks at home who are disabled, children, the elderly who are relying on these programs and want to work and are looking for opportunity and are working. And we're going to make it more burdensome for them to receive the benefit. I just don't understand the mindset, particularly given all the wealth and prosperity. We're focusing on the wrong communities here in terms of who has to sacrifice.
Yeah.
Right? We shouldn't be asking the folks who are the most vulnerable, who are hurting, you know, dig a little deeper. You know, give a little bit more. For what? I don't get it. And that's why even with the tax bill, what blows my mind is all the inequality we have. We can talk about, you know, how the corporate tax rate might be too high relative to the rest of the world. We can talk about that. Okay, I'm reasonable. But if we're going to talk about reducing it, well, we should be tying it to job growth and wages and not just give a blank check. And we should not be talking about lowering the tax rate for the highest earners. Why? I don't understand that. I'm not in the midst of all this inequality. So yes, you know, the fact of the matter is, and I don't know if you've seen some of these ads that are being run on the issue of SNAP, but it's pretty offensive. You know, when you see an ad going at people who rely on SNAP and you see the for sale liquor store being plastered on the commercial screen, as if you're relying on SNAP, you therefore are just showing up in liquor stores. That's your approach. And there's something very sinister and ugly about that. And it's feeding on stereotypes and biases that are very divisive and ugly. And it's become too commonplace in today's political climate.